as CEO is the world's most lonely job. In fact, a good friend of mine and one of the top executives in the world once said, "I'm the most popular lonely man in the world." With a world where political correctness increasingly dictate every word we say, where more and more CEOs just can't leave the office or conduct a speech without an army of lawyers fact-checking every word, I think it's fair to say that being a leader in today's world just has changed a lot. Today's show is all about loneliness, what it means and how you overcome it, even if 100,000 of your staff tells you that they love you. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world, our World Business Forum audience, and all the Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of Thinkers 50, a Hall of Fame, and has written some of the most iconic books out there, like What Got You Here Won't Get You There, and Mojo, How to Get It. But beside all those fancy credentials, he's just an amazing guy. Listen, once again, Marshall, the last time before New Year, welcome back.
It's very good. Greetings from Dubai, everyone. I'm Barry here with my comrade, Martin Lindstrom. Martin Lindstrom is the world's most interesting human being. He's the world's authority on branding. He's written books called Biology. He's Time Magazine said he's one of the 100 most influential people, but only in the world, only in this world. And he also wrote another great book called The Ministry of Common Sense. And the thing I like about Martin also is he always is willing to help and do good deeds. He doesn't give a shit if he gets paid for it or not. He just goes ahead and does it anyway. So Martin is a good guy.
Oh, thank you, Marshall. And listen, I just want to tell all of you guys and girls listening out there, when he talks about me being the most interesting person on planet Earth, he is so wrong, because we have two guests today, which are much more interesting than I am. But before we get to that point, I just want to say to all of you that if you have any questions or comments, just post them here or tell us who you are and where you are. And if you like the show, don't forget to press the like or the follow button. Now, according to one recent study published by BCG, listen to this, half of the US CEO population actually experience loneliness on the job, and most of them feel loneliness is hindering their work performance. And study also show that loneliness is linked to burnout among leaders, which, by the way, we'll talk a lot about in a couple of minutes from now. Now, our two guests on today's M&M show have seen loneliness, each from their perspective. They've been close to heads of states and global CEOs and influencers, all possessing power, while I think deep inside, they're all feeling in one way or another deeply lonely. So, Marshall, I can't wait to start this show. Tell me more about our first guest.
Our first guest is a good person, John Dickerson. John is a great guy. He's been on 60 Minutes and the morning show. He's in charge of election coverage. He's led Face the Nation. I don't know if there are any shows he hasn't been the host of. It seems like he's been a host of almost everything. He's also a great writer. He writes for Atlantic and Slate, and he's got a new book out now. And his new book is called The Hardest Job, and it's about the American presidency. So I thought that's kind of where we might kick things off, because there's a great old saying, it's lonely at the top. It's lonely at the top, and you don't get much more top than being the president. Just give some quick thoughts on that new book about why is that the hardest job?
Well, thank you, Marshall. It's great to be with you. I mean, the presidency is lonely. Bill Clinton said it's the White House is the crown jewel in the federal penitentiary system. The idea being that it's like being in a prison, and that's part of the loneliness, is that you have no control over your own movements and behaviors, and you can't commiserate with anyone. There are only a few presidents alive still. And it's not often the case that presidents are in good terms with each other, although when Barack Obama was coming into office, George Bush said to him, I'm happy to talk to you about anything you may experience that is unique to this job, because at the time, Jimmy Carter was the only other president alive. And of course, Bush had the most immediate experience with the loneliness. And where does that come from? It's not just the lack of ability to control your own life. It's not just that you lack a person to commiserate with, but you are, to quote from another president, and this is LBJ, being president is like being a jackass in a hailstorm. Sometimes you just have to sit there and take it. And that's largely what the job requires, is an ability to take the pounding, not just of the number of decisions you have to make, often decisions where you're uninformed because you can never be informed enough, but you also have to take it when you have to basically stay quiet when you're being criticized, even though you could answer the reason for the criticism, but to do so would unravel some other plan you've got. And it's very hard to still the instinct to not prove that you're smart or that you're right. And in the presidency, you have to do it all the time.
Now, tell me, John, you have spent quality time with the last three presidents, right? Trump and Biden and Obama. When you look at their behavior, first of all, how lonely do they feel? And how do they navigate all those people which have personal agendas, kind of disguising what the true intentions are?
Well, that's the biggest problem, Martin, is that, and it's the biggest problem in the job, not the biggest problem that every president recognizes. Biden and Obama understood it. And in fact, Barack Obama appointed Joe Biden to be kind of his one person that would come to him with bad news, tell him what he didn't want to hear, really persistently make a nuisance of himself. Any president you talk to and any chief of staff, particularly chiefs of staff, the job is sometimes called being the president's son of a bitch. It was given that name by Dwight Eisenhower, because the job is to come in and tell the president when he's wrong, tell the president when he's out of line. And then the other part of the job that makes you unpopular is to tell everybody else to leave the president alone, to not eat up his time. So that name for the job comes for a variety of reasons, but one of them is to persistently give the president the kind of news that nobody else will give him, because as George W. Bush used to tell the story, people will get to the threshold of the Oval Office and say, I'm going to go in there and tell the president what I think, and I'm going to give him what for and tell him how he's wrong and reasons A, B, C, and D. And then they walk in and they say, Mr. President, you're looking so fit today and trim. How's the backhand? They don't actually do it and carry through. President Trump had a different view. When I asked him about this in the Oval Office, who he kind of has around him, because he was talking about people who come into the Oval Office and kind of melt under the majesty of the moment. I said, given that, who do you have around you who tells you what your blind spots are, who helps you? And he said, well, maybe in life you've figured all that out before you've gotten here, which essentially meant I don't have any blind spots and I don't need to deputize anyone in that role. I think that's a singular vision of that job, not shared by his predecessors or anyone else.
I don't get a chance to work with presidents very much. On the other hand, I work with a lot of CEOs and a lot of very, very distinguished people, John, many of whom you have met. So I had the privilege of John and I hanging out with a bunch of very, very distinguished people over time. And you've met a lot of them, as you see on the screen right now. And back to the loneliness issue, I remember one person saying he enjoyed our little hour together because it was a time in his life where he could act like a human being for once. Yeah. So what's been some of your reactions sitting in on these sessions with all of our different leaders from all different fields?
Well, and because of your experience, Marshall, it's why I interviewed you for the book, because one of the things when you're at the top of your game that is very difficult is that people think that the skills that got them to their current level are the ones they just need to keep repeating. So you need to, what got you here won't get you there. But if you're in a position of being president or CEO, you are often considered the person who has all the answers. And so
Right.
to show vulnerability and say, I don't have the answers, we need a structure for figuring out these answers, in some cultures makes you look bad. I mean, as a president, you're never allowed to say, I don't know.
Right.
And that's a flaw in the system. But, the curious seeking leaders who give away some of their power, who give away some of their authority for the purposes of empowering other people and helping them. That's the people who have done that are the ones who seem to me have been the most successful, both in terms of getting the best out of their teams, but also in terms of not carrying this incalculable weight that can't be solved through pure brain power alone. It can only be solved through useful use of your team.
Marshall, it's fascinating because what you're saying, John, is exactly what Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Boeing and Ford, said, that you should be open to show vulnerabilities. It actually shows your strength. And I think most men, sorry if I talk about men in this case, but I can only relate to my own sex here for a second, that most guys are born and raised by not showing vulnerabilities. And suddenly you actually have to show vulnerabilities, where I'll say women probably got it much further than much earlier than we did, right? Amazing stuff. Listen, okay, coming up, our next guest argues that loneliness is a pandemic too, but is there a vaccine against it now when we are into this track of vaccines? Well, listen, I'm pleased to welcome award-winning journalist Celeste Headlee. Celeste has anchored shows, including Tell Me More, Talk of the Nation, and All Things Considered, of course, on NPS, and also the Weekend Edition. She is the author of We Need to Talk, and her TED Talk has been watched more than 15 million times. Celeste, listen, welcome to our show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Likewise. Listen, I had to share a video with you. I just so loved it, right? So this video is all about political correctness. And I think there's nowhere better to do it than to show you just 40 seconds. So everyone, watch this.
How many of you have unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? You know, it used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either.
I so love it. Well done. You give me goosebumps. Tell me, has the world completely derailed? What's going on here?
What's happened is that we've kind of gotten into binary thinking a little, which, look, we're human beings. We tend to think in binary anyway, but these days we're really not seeing in shades of gray. So in other words, if someone disagrees with you on any kind of issue that you think is important, that immediately makes them the equivalent of a Nazi, right? Like we are really, really ready and willing to shove people into that category of Nazi. And then of course you say, well, I can't, would you talk to a Nazi? Are you telling me to talk to a Nazi? I'm not even using the word Nazi figuratively, right? Literally the number of times that people are compared to Hitler is just uncountable on social media. And as soon as you put someone into that category beyond the pale, it's a principle that of course you don't speak with them. They are absolutely evil. And that's what has happened. You know, going back to the days of my grandparents, they used to have neighborhood barbecues. I mean, imagine how naive that sounds these days, right? And there would be people in the neighborhood that they'd be like, oh, that's James, he's insane. Or, you know, that's Michael from down the street, he voted for Nixon, or whatever it may be. But they were never uninvited to the barbecue. We don't seem to be capable of that kind of nuance anymore.
Is there any way to get around this? Or do you think it's just going to be a slippery, slobbery road towards hell?
You know, that TED Talk is from 2015. And at that time I would have said, oh, no, we absolutely can turn this ship around. 6 years later, I'm like, yes, we still can turn this ship around. We just haven't started yet. We have to start talking to the people who disagree with us. We have to break away from binary thinking and accept the fact that someone can disagree with you, sometimes on very important subjects, and not be a monster. We're so quick to say, that's inhuman, or that's not who we are when we see someone behaving badly, when the truth is that all of these mistakes, even cruelty, is very, very human. And that means there is room to discuss these things among people. I'm not suggesting you go to a federal prison and talk to a serial killer. I'm talking about your neighbor or that person behind you in the coffee shop. It's okay to speak with them even if they don't recycle.
I just love what you're saying. And, so, God bless you. I just love what you're doing. Let me ask you a question. To me, you may not see yourself as intimidating, but I can see you as being incredibly intimidating. You're very articulate, you're smart, you're knowledgeable, you're a public figure. How do you get people over just being scared shitless of you?
I have no idea. I mean, everybody talks to me. I mean, I'm the one person everyone will talk to. I'll tell you what, I'm an extremely good listener, and I'm sincerely curious about other people and their stories and their lives and what's going on. And I think that curiosity can be very disarming. And I think that just allowing people to tell their stories, is one of the best ways possible to engage someone in a friendly relationship. Let them talk about themselves.
Yes, and Martin, before you say anything, the other thing is that you have nice smile and good sense of humor too, which I think that probably helps, because if you have a very serious demeanor and you're impressive and educated and articulate and blah 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 blah, it can be very scary to talk to you. So yeah, it's maybe as part of it. Martin,
there are some people who honestly suffer from what's called resting bitch face. That's not an insult. That's just some people, when they're at rest, their face looks irritated. And I don't have that. I have resting nice face. So frankly, I feel like I get away with a lot. I could be having all kinds of horrible thoughts, but when I'm at rest, my face looks like this.
That's good.
And it's not judgmental.
Oh gosh, what face do I have? Don't even dare not to smile anymore. It's so funny you're talking about humor here, because I think that humor can disarm people, but we're so afraid of using humor because it can be increasingly controversial. In fact, we did a show on this. But there's another thing you also have talked a lot about, that is small talk. And how we kind of become so clinical in everything we do that small talk is disappearing out of the room. And in fact, you're saying it has an existential crisis. Is that true?
Yeah, it's interesting. So let me tell you a little bit. Scientists have actually been studying small talk for quite some time, because here's the truth. Conversation is good for you in almost every possible situation, unless the tone of the conversation is hostile or competitive. It's good for you. It lowers your heart rate. It lowers your cortisol levels. We know that having a couple active friendships, in fact, is better protection against stroke than medication, right? So the question for scientists is, if small talk is so good for human beings, why do we avoid it? Why do we reject that phone call and then send a text back saying, hey, what do you need, right? So I'll just give you a couple examples. For example, one scientist worked with a group of docents at a museum, and they were trying to encourage them to approach visitors and have a little chat with them about what was in the museum. And it went great. All of the docents said, I'm not going to like this. This is going to be terrible. They went through the course of the experiment. They actually turned out to enjoy it. They said, yeah, I actually enjoyed that. It was a big surprise. And the last question was, so are you going to do more of this in the future? And they said, no. No. So this is the problem here, as we don't really have an answer for this as to why we are avoiding talking to one another. Another thing that it's important to know is that very often people predict they're going to get into an argument with strangers if they strike up a conversation, but it almost never happens. Even over in the US, of course, we celebrate Thanksgiving, and a lot of people avoid seeing their family members at Thanksgiving because they don't want to get into an argument. And yet only 8% of people say that there's actually a real danger of getting into a real argument. So you see, there's this outsized fear of conversation with strangers, with our family members, with our friends, that just is not backed up by the evidence. I can't even answer this. I don't even know why we avoid it. It's good for you.
I just want to say to all of you guys and girls out there, if you have a resting face and you're in doubt about if it's as bad as mine, then I'd like you to shoot a photo of yourself now and publish it so everyone can sort of judge if it is a bad resting face or not. And Celeste, I'm sure, will volunteer to give hard feedback. Okay, well, coming up, we will discuss Eisenhower's unique technique, sorting his daily challenges in a simple way, yet I would have to say powerful way. And I think the best way of doing that is actually to throw the ball back in John's court, because if there's one thing John has done through his amazing writing, is to study and analyze some of the previous presidents. So I just have to ask you, John, what was Eisenhower's technique in selling or setting priorities and determining the urgency of various issues? How did they structure their life? Because it seems like on one hand, you're lonely, you don't know how to listen to people, and then you also have this huge volume of stuff coming in all the time.
You know, one part of the loneliness that I forgot, that President Obama used to talk about his inability to just go on a simple walk, the way he used to go walking through Hawaii, and that just even that moment of kind of doing nothing is you're robbed from that as well. Eisenhower's insight was the insight that anybody who's been successful in leading anything knows, which is you have to set priorities. It's amazing how much of our presidency is not about setting priorities. I'm a part of, and Celeste is too, although I'm not going to taint her by making her a part of the political press, but part of the political press gets the priorities problem wrong repeatedly. I mean, constantly. Anyway, Eisenhower's approach was essentially don't let the urgent crowd out the important. And the idea was basically, in a job of the presidency, it's always urgent. But if you only attend to the urgent things, those things in the distant that you can do something about if you start today will, if left unattended, be urgent tomorrow. And so Eisenhower's maxim became what's known as the Eisenhower quadrant, which is essentially, if you take a box and separate it into four smaller boxes, on the upper left-hand side, you have those things that are important and urgent. So that's the fire that's burning in the next room. You can't let that go. You have to deal with that. The next thing is the second quadrant are things that are important, but not urgent. So it's important that I deal with the wiring in the next room, but it's not currently aflame. But if I deal with it now, the wiring won't catch, on fire with the papers that are stacked in the next room, and we won't have a fire at all. The third quadrant is not important, but urgent. That's essentially 99% of your emails. It comes in, it's blinking, it's fiercely attacking your attention, but most of the time it's not urgent. And then the fourth is most of your TikTok videos. Those are the things that are not important and they are not urgent. You've gone to graze across your TikTok and you spend an hour watching them. There is extreme benefit to mind wandering, to moments of repose, to unfocused time. But this is not that. This is wasted time that has no salutary benefit.
I have a question for both of you. You can get some coaching from me here. So I need some free coaching from both of you. Now, every now and again, well, I'll give an example of other people than myself. I a couple of times on social occasions. Once I went to dinner with Dick Enberg, who's a very nice guy. I don't know if you remember, he was a sportscaster. But like right in the middle of dinner, he goes into sportscasting. I mean, well, but I met Casey Stengel, Casey and I. And then another time I sat next to, on an airplane, Bill O'Reilly. Same thing. I thought that guy just goes into this riff. And I was thinking, I thought that TV show was kind of an act, but he just went into this whole routine. And my cousin Alan pointed out that I do this sometimes. I'm so used to giving speeches and crap that, the next thing you know, I'm giving some, tape number 1854. both of you all have been in roles where you interview people, you play a certain role. How do you avoid not getting into this kind of tape? If I hope I'm making sense here, how do you avoid not getting into this, well, President Obama, well, Marshall, or well, Celeste, where you start becoming John Dickerson, whoever the hell you are, as opposed to whatever the person is really talking about. I hope that rambling conversation made some vague amount of sense. So for John, you go first. How do you avoid doing that?
I have an awful memory. So even if I had a set piece thing in my head, I would have forgotten it by now. In fact, as I was doing the quadrant thing, I thought, okay, I've got fire in the next room. I have no idea what the second quadrant version of that metaphor is. And I really hope I can land this. So that's one thing. Yeah. And what you're talking about is the shtick. So you meet somebody for the first time and you think, wow, they are so engaging and fascinating. And then you meet them the second time and you realize that 80% of what they're giving you both times was their material. They have like a shtick. Now, some people's shtick is really good and it's worth listening to twice. But others, what it conveys in the end, I think, is maybe that they're not really engaging with you, that they're just outputting. And as Celeste was talking about earlier, the benefit of conversation is that it enlivens our own creative impulses, both as we're listening and explaining. And that is an incredibly healthy thing. But it's not healthy if you're just pressing, play on your pre-recorded message.
I guess it's my turn. And let me just echo what John just said, all of which I completely agree with. Most people go into their conversations thinking about what it is they're going to say. And I will say this, research shows that the smarter you are, statistically speaking, the worse your conversational skills. And there's a number of reasons for this. Number one, you know a lot of stuff. And therefore you go into these conversations ready to download on people.
Right.
And you tell them all this interesting stuff that you know. The other thing is that when you are smart, you are much more likely to believe you know what someone is saying. So they start their sentence and you go, yeah, because you know where they're going with this and you already have your response in mind, meaning that you're really not listening to a whole lot of what they're saying. The other thing is that all human beings, within a split second of meeting someone, our subconscious mind ranks them. We rank them according to whether they're smarter than we are, less smart, higher rank in business or success or career, et cetera, et cetera. And if they are of lower rank than us, we tend not to listen to them. And when you have a high opinion of your own intellect, you are going to find that most people you subconsciously think are of lower rank and therefore you don't really listen to them. So Bill O'Reilly strikes me as the kind, I've never met him in person, but he strikes me as the kind of person who thinks everybody else is not as smart as he is. And so of course he is going to think he doesn't need to listen to whatever this person is saying. That's what the shtick that John is talking about. It's not just shtick. It's that there's this belief that you are gifting the world with your genius and all the incredible thoughts that you have. I'm not saying that anybody who does shtick is arrogant. I'm just saying that the odds go higher the more that you think you are super, super smart. So the cure to all of this is to, instead of going into a conversation worrying about what it is you're going to say, go into a conversation like a really great interviewer and think about what is it that you want to hear from this person? What is it that this person can tell you that nobody else can? This is one of the things that they tell interviewers all the time. Don't ask them for data, information, dates, times, names. You can get that off Wikipedia. Ask them for what it is only they know. Only this person can tell you. And if that's what you're going into the conversation ready to do, you won't descend into shtick.
Just want to just applaud what you're saying. I want to say one thing, that is, did you notice how John, when he was asked, actually showed vulnerabilities by saying that or claiming that he didn't remember his model? I think this is so extraordinary. This is spot on what you're saying. I have to derail the conversation a little bit now. I hope you don't hate me for it, but because you both are journalists, you work in a field which have been under tremendous amount of pressure. I think both Marshall and I are very curious about one thing, and that one thing is the trust issue and where this whole space is going. And I know this is completely outside script, but I know you, John, your mom was the first correspondent for CBS many, many years ago. You come from a family which is living and breathing this whole trade, which I would claim is in an existential crisis, and where the respect between journalists and people is kind of completely changing at the moment. Any thoughts on this, John, first?
Well, I think one place to start is where what Celeste was just saying about the adopting a position of curiosity. It can help in conversation and in meeting people. If you treat every engagement like a journalist, you're not only going to be curious, but you also have to remember what happened in your conversation as if you were going to have to write about it or do a story about it, which makes you much more attentive to what somebody's saying, because the details become valuable for whatever story you're going to walk away with. It's a great way to make conversations more interesting. I think that the challenges in our businesses are, we could be here till breakfast. I think one of the biggest challenges is that not everybody adopts the posture that Celeste was talking about in doing our work. And that's particularly true of the political press. And part of that is arrogance. Part of it is pattern recognition. We want to learn the marginal thing that's happening, and therefore we slot all other things into existing patterns that we know. And that's a useful way to order thinking. I mean, chess grandmasters don't look at every possible move they can make on the chessboard. They discard 99% of them and then focus on the marginal few that would give them success in an instance. But that can also lead to groupthink. It can lead to missing things. It can lead to lack of self examination that allows biases to kick in. So that's a professional challenge that existed before we had a 24-hour news cycle, and with multiple different kinds of outlets. It's challenged even more now because we're all distracted. We're all operating on multiple different platforms. And so that has shredded our own attention and shredded the attention of our audience. So that's caused us largely not only to follow our worst instincts personally, but as a profession, we've obviously chased audience using lots of the consumer product technologies that are great for consumer products maybe, but are not good for disseminating news along the traditional best way to do that, which is to focus on the high priority things and tell people important information they need to live their lives and operate in a democracy.
Amazing stuff. Celeste?
Yeah, I mean, I echo, I suppose this show might be more interesting if John and I were arguing with one another, but I echo everything that he said. I would also say that there is what's known at this point as the Google effect, which is this bias that many, many people have, whereby they think they can be an expert in almost every subject just by doing a quick Google search. We're not allowing other people to be experts in their field anymore. And this is something that we've noted for a long time. What you probably already know, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, in which it's a cognitive bias where we all tend to think we're smarter and more capable than we actually are. Well over somewhere between 70 and 80% of people say they're above average drivers.
Yeah.
So you do that math, right? In my field, more than 4 out of 5 people say they've had a bad communication has caused a problem in their past relationships, but fewer than 1 in 5 say it was their fault.
Right.
So again, do the math here. We tend to think that we are, again, smarter and better than we actually are. We think we're above average. And when I talk about the Google effect, we're not having that curiosity that John mentioned, because we think we know. Whenever we'll be at dinner with somebody and somebody will start talking about something, and we under the table really quickly do a Google search so we can pretend like we know what they're talking about, rather than just saying, oh, that's interesting, I've never heard of that before, and letting them tell you. And we're seeing this happening in a lot of actually really important and life-threatening cases in terms of the fact that huge numbers of people now think that they are experts in epidemiology because they did a quick and read the first couple paragraphs of a few articles online, and so they're refusing to take a life-saving vaccine. These can be in minor cases or they can be in major cases, but we're not letting other people be experts in their field. And that's not how human beings work. It's not how we've survived. For a really long time, I'm sorry to go on here for a second, but I get all wound up about this. For a really long time, we didn't know how Homo sapiens ended up being the most successful human species. There were 6 different human species. Neanderthal gets a bad rap. They were very impressive. But now we know that the reason that Homo sapiens was the last human left standing was because of our collaborative abilities, our communication and our collaborative abilities. We can take down a bison because we have the communication skills to find out who has the best aim with a spear, who thinks geometrically and can peel that bison off from the rest of the herd. We can find out where everybody's talents are and use them to form a team that is much more capable than the individual. That's how we have survived and thrived. The ability to collaborate, the ability to let other people to be good at what they do, that's a survival skill for our species. And we're not doing it. And that worries me.
Allowing people to be good at what they do. And then this term, the Google effect, haven't heard about that before. Well, I think it's time to give our 2 guests a question, which of course they can Google if they want to do that, but I'm pretty sure they can answer it anyway. So why don't we run the BCG minute?
Hi, I'm Katrin Hinkel and I'm the General Manager of Microsoft in Switzerland. I would like to know, with all of the leadership discussions, how does technology that becomes so predominant in our workspace and interaction with our customers, interaction with our people, how does that change leadership? I'm really looking forward to your answer.
Celeste, do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that there is sometimes a tendency to demonize technology. I see technology as a tool, and human beings have been using tools since at least the Stone Age. It's so natural to us that if you pick up a hammer, your brain literally treats that hammer like an extension of your arm. And what that means is that we have to be intentional about the way we use it. Right? You don't pick up a hammer to put together your IKEA bookshelf and then keep that hammer in your hand all day long. That hammer has an effect on your brain, and so does all your technology. It affects your brain. There's no way around that. And so we just need to be intentional about it, rather than treating technology like the Doritos bag when you're sitting and watching and moving and you just mindlessly eat it until it's all gone. We need to be aware of when we are near technology, when it's in our peripheral vision, when we're using it, how we're using it, and think a little bit more carefully about whether this message I'm about to send is best delivered through a phone call, or if it really has to be an email. This is really important for leadership because we have studied the people who lead primarily through email, and we know that is a very, very weak way to lead. People who lead mostly through email tend to shirk many of their responsibilities. They're not good at prioritizing. They don't have the kind of connection with their workers that tends to make employees feel heard or engaged. They tend to have lower morale among their teams. So even though it's really tempting to default to email or Slack or any of those other digitally mediated devices, it's important that we see tech as a tool and decide which tool is the best for that particular job.
It's so well said. I mean, John, you have a
Now, Martin,
typewriter.
before you go into John,
Yeah.
I like to try to read nonverbal communication here. So I was looking at John's face before she started talking, and the nonverbal reading I had was, hope the hell she goes first.
Well, that A, because it was a great answer, but B, because there was a siren on my street. So if I unmuted, you'd be hearing New York's finest ambulance corps.
I figured something was going on. I just figured it was ignorance. So that's good.
I just want to pick it up on this one because John, you and I, we talked about your typewriter and how you just tell me about the typewriter. Why do you have a typewriter? Is this decoration or what?
Well, no, I started out in print and still am in print, I guess, for the first 25 years of my career. So it keeps me in touch with that part of my work, which is the writing. And for me, it's something that sending letters that are either handwritten or by typewriter is a way to communicate with people that slows things down a little bit. It engages me differently in the task than say writing on a computer certainly would. And I think if I receive something that's had that level of either intentionality or care put into it, whether it's handwritten or typewritten, it comes to me in a different way than an email does. To pick up on what Celeste is saying, and just to further repeat what she's saying and build on it, there are very few other things that we engage with as much as we do technology where we do it as unthinkingly as we do technology. And what Celeste is arguing for is just a more intentional way of thinking about all the technology we interact with. And I couldn't agree more. Obviously the biggest challenge for any leader, and for me, is keeping my attention from being shredded by all of the technological attacks on my attention, which are both the phone and the computer and the digital watch, but also the way in which information is designed to pierce whatever shields we put up. However, technology also allows me to compete and defeat the attention shredding by allowing me to capture ideas, by allowing me to reflect on things if they're all in one place, which technology does in a way that's much better than just pinning them up to the bulletin board in your office. And so if, as Celeste says, you engage with each tool that you're using in the way it's supposed to be engaged with, and for the time and task that it's meant for, and then separate from that, and go back to writing things down, in notebooks in your back pocket, then you have the kind of corrugated and complex relationship with technology that you should have with the meaningful things in your life.
John, you and I have spent time together on Zoom calls, and I thought that was a very positive use of technology in one way, because we had people from all around the world. And what were some of your reflections? Because I think that was, maybe it's just me, but I thought it was a pretty unusual experience to see people at that level be as vulnerable as they were week after week after week.
Well, part of that is you had created an environment in which people could share their vulnerabilities and came to play. So that was good. But there's no way you could have convened that if we didn't have all the Zoom technology and COVID hadn't lowered the barrier. If COVID hadn't happened, we would probably think, this is one of them video conferencing calls things I've heard about. They're imperfect. They're as bad as regular conference calls, and I'm not going to be open to them. But COVID lowered all of our barriers, the way MTV lowered what we were willing to watch on television. It used to have to be much more polished, and MTV showed us you could shake the camera and do things in a grainy way, and suddenly that's the way everybody was doing everything. So barrier to entry changed, and also you created a space in which people were willing to talk about ideas that it turns out they didn't get much chance to talk about.
Good.
Well, listen, thank you so much, John. Your new book is out on the streets, The Hardest Job in the World, right? Congratulations with it. And I also want to say,
Celeste has a new book too.
that's what I'm about to say. Yeah, exactly, Celeste. And Celeste's book is Talk About Race, which is also another great read. So I hope you'll have time to pick them up in the bookstore. So thanks a lot, both of you. I just want to hand it over to you, Marshall. What's your reflection so far?
I just wish you had, I could talk to these two forever. So to me, I just thought they were very, very fascinating people. And I've got to say, and John, I told you this, and Celeste, I didn't know you, but I had a stereotype about John that he turned out to be much better than the sort of stereotype about him. He did not seem to have a board stuck up his ass at all.
Marshall, how do you want me to summarize that? That's impossible. Okay, let's run the mule minutes for a second, the mule summary. I am so happy it's soon going to be a new year, because Marshall and the guests are just giving us more and more challenges here. But I have to say, there's so much good stuff we picked up from our amazing two guests. First of all, we talk about the ability to listen. We've forgotten about listening. And I think with Celeste talking about how When you are extra clever, you are more busy just rambling off all your knowledge and almost intimidating people around you. Talk about intimidating. So you also talk about the resting face. Do you have one of these? I certainly have one of those. These are the two factors I really loved a lot. There's some other stuff here, by the way. I also want to talk a little bit about John. I think, John, even though you claim you've forgotten the model, then I want to bring back the Eisenhower model one more time just to refresh it in everyone's mind. So I'm going to bring out my virtual pen here, the mural pen, and I'm going to drag in a couple of the boxes which John was talking about. So the first one is urgent and important. What is the concept here? Well, he basically said that Eisenhower worked on a simple idea of structuring your day-to-day life. And you had to put it into these four categories. Urgent and important, of course, is first in line, but then you have the urgent but not important down there. If I bring in the third box on the top right, which is not urgent, but important, and you have not urgent and not important. Here's the issue. The issue is this is cluttering our lives. So when we see stuff coming in, we immediately just bring it up as a priority, as a top priority. I think all of you have that feeling. I mean, in the morning when you wake up and you have these 200 emails waiting for you, do you really, before you read those emails, say, hey, I want to take 10 minutes aside and I want to structure my day before I'm bombarded with immediate things I have to do? It's almost like you create your own little roadmap for the day. And then when you get your emails, you actually structure them according to the advice Eisenhower and of course John gave us. I think the issue is we have so much stuff coming in, we're just taking whatever comes first, forgetting the priorities and ending up with just being reactive to everything. And I think that's the essence of both Eisenhower and of course John's model. If this is a professional summary though, it's another story, but it certainly was the mirror moment. Back again, Marshall. You in Dubai, I'm in Zurich, Switzerland. What an amazing way to wrap up this show. Thank you so much. Do you know what, everyone? Next year, we have some amazing people joining us. Everything from Adam Grant to Malcolm Gladwell. Tara Banks is joining us. I think it's the 11th of January to talk about how she built up her personal brand with a guest, which is pretty remarkable as well, which I won't disclose yet, but she will be joining Tara Banks. So we have some pretty remarkable folks, girls and boys coming up on this show. I think you will love it. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for watching. See you again Tuesday, the 11th of January at 2 p.m. Eastern. Take care. Bye for now.
Have to communicate, persuade, listen, dialogue, inspire, motivate, and all of those are emotional intelligence skills. It's a completely independent factor in success, and it has to do with whether you can keep your eye on the goal.